I love monochrome or black and white photography. I get asked a lot of how do you convert your photographs to black and white? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you today. Over the next few minutes we are going to look at two pieces of software, Adobe Lightroom and Nik Silver Efex Pro. I'm not endorsed or supported by either of these companies, so the methods I use, the opinions I have are my own. They're based on how I use them as part of my workflow. There are other products, other methods exist, so take a bit of each and make it your own. Hello and welcome back to the channel once again. So I recently did a lecture for the Royal Photographic Society, and one of the questions came up was how do you do your black and white conversions? And it's not unusual that I get asked this during lectures, to be honest, and I've probably had a few comments on the channels asking me similar questions. So I thought it's probably about time that I did a video around this, and I'm using one of the pictures that I showed during that lecture. It's quite, say, an old photograph. It's relatively new, really, in the time I've been doing photography, but it goes back to 2014, and I thought, you know what, I think it would work reasonably well as a mono conversion. So I'm going to do two different images for you tonight using two different pieces of software. The first one's going to be Lightroom, and then we're going to go into Silver Efex Pro after that. So without any further sort of chat from me, because we want to get into the subject, let's get into Lightroom, and we'll pick it up from there and see if you can follow along with me if you want to. Okay, so let's make a start. I've got my cup of tea, and that's the most important part to start with. So I've already opened up Lightroom already in the library mode for you on the screen, and the image which we're going to look at is basically one that I've done a conversion on already, but we're going to start right back at the beginning and show you the process that I've made. I'm just going to use that final one later on for reference for my own uses. So the first thing I'm going to do is, so I'm not working on the originals, I'm going to create a virtual copy. And that just gives me another image to work in. And then we can move straight across into the develop module. And this is where all the magic's going to start to begin. So there are a number of different ways that you can work on this. And I'm going to have a look at a couple at the top to start with. So we've got treatment, we've got color and black and white, and we could just switch it straight into black and white. Or we can look at these Adobe color profiles. What I'm actually going to do is click on this little panel here, and it'll give us a lot of thumbnails showing us some basic ones. So it's got all the basic Adobe raw and panels on there that we can look at. But down here there are 17 black and white conversions, and you'll notice as I drop the mouse over them, it changes the image on the screen. So we could use these to give ourselves either the finished image that we want to use or a starting point for our own work. Now I'm not really going to use those. I prefer to use I prefer to go back and just actually use the black and white treatment straight off the top and do my own work from there. So we're going to click it into black and white. Now when I first open up something like this, I'm looking at a couple of things. One of the things I'm looking at mainly is the histogram, because what I want to do with the histograms, I want to use that to set my white points and my black points. So if we start with the black point first, all we're simply going to do is bring that slider down to where it gets to a point where we just start to see some clipping. And we're getting that just down in the bottom there at the moment. So we'll leave that at -19. I'm going to bring the white point up the other way, and eventually we'll start to see a little bit of clipping on the top there. And I'm just going to bring it back because I don't want to go too far, because that sky may overexpose in a minute as well. So let's just take that up to maybe +2. Let's just bring it up a tiny bit. It's already quite bright. Exposure, I'm going to bring the exposure down a bit because the overall feel of the image for me is too light. So let's take this down to, and it's all about, you know, personal preference and estimates, but I'm going to go down to -6.5 to start with, and that's going to be our starting point for that. Now those highlights in the sky and down here in the reflection still look very, very bright. And we can go straight into the highlight area and bring that down. Now, quite interestingly, if you look at the top of the screen, where you, if you look at the histogram, sorry, when I bring them over these nodes, it'll grey out or say highlight an area in the histogram that we're going to affect. So if you look at the right hand side now, the histogram's slightly lighter, the background, sorry, slightly lighter where that is. We're just going to mess around with it. We're going to bring it down to where we feel that we've just got it in the right sort of area. And I'm just starting to see a little bit of texture come in the sky around there. So that'll do for now for what we're going to do, because I will later on darken the sky down more, probably with graduated filters and with a vignette, which is beyond the scope of this video, what I'm doing here today, but that's our starting point. So the next bit, let's have a look at those shadows, shall we? So I think we can probably increase the shadows a little bit now, because we've got some areas which are clipping. So I'm just going to bring them up. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I know when I add vignettes later on, and when I add some other things, we're going to introduce a little bit more underexposure into those areas. So we'll just bring those a tiny bit. Now, normally I would also, but I would do it on a colour video as well, but normally I would also sort of mess around with presence and things, texture, clarity and dehaze, but I'm not going to do that. For the black and white part of this conversion, what I really want to do is to show you how I use this black and white mix. Now, the black and white mix is basically going to give me the best use of those tonal ranges, and it's similar to putting filters on front of your lenses, but it's a little bit more controllable than that, because if you were to put a red filter on a black and white film, you're stuck with a red filter, and the same with greens, yellows and blues as well. But with using the black and white mix in this panel on Lightroom, we can have a lot of control. Now, it's very rare that I actually use red in a lot of my landscapes. It has a minor effect on things, but landscapes I do generally don't need anything in there. There's no reds in the images. It's all about greens and blues and yellows and oranges. So the oranges and the yellows, etc., will make a huge impact. So if we just go way over, you can just see how much you can affect those tonal ranges with them. And it's just about deciding for your own preference whether you'd like that to be a bit darker or not. And in my case, yes, I do, but not to the point that it becomes really noticeable. I just want to add something extra to it. It's almost like adding local contrast using those tonal ranges. I'm going to do the same with the yellow. So we could make the yellows very dark, or we could bring the yellow up to make it really light. But I want it to contrast a little bit with the orange areas. So do you know what? I'm going to lighten the yellows quite a bit. And that's going to give breathe a lot of life back into the picture. The next thing we're going to do is play with the greens as well. Once again, we can just overdo it, go way over the top. And if you do that, then basically it'll show you exactly what areas you're going to impact the most, and you get an idea what you want to do. I'm going to darken those areas down again. So we're going to take those down a bit so they stand out. And I think about -20 is going to work for us. Sometimes in the blues and in the purples, they're not really there. Now, blue tends to influence the sky and water. So if you look at the sky darkening now, it has quite an impact, and the reflection as well, but it creates quite a nasty halo around the edges in this reflection, just down around here, look. So we need to be a little bit careful that we don't overdo it. So we can bring it down, but we want to bring it down just so we don't see any halo in there. Because any more than that, it's going to start looking wrong. So I think we'll leave it about -10. Purple, sometimes purple will have an impact as well. Sometimes it will do nothing, but I actually quite like it in this case, where it's just adding a little bit more, a darker area to that reflection right on the bottom of the frame. So we're going to take that down to about there. That's going to be fine for our uses. Magenta, is magenta having an impact anywhere? Very little in this picture. So we're going to leave that exactly where it is. So this is where I would kind of say that, to be honest, my black and white conversion part has come to an end, because the next sort of alterations that I would make would really involve going into, like I said, the texture, the clarity, the dehaze area, and doing some local dodging and burning. So I'm not going to do that in this video, as it's going to go on for absolutely ever. So I'm not going to show you how I finish the image off, but I am going to show you the finished picture. And when we've done that, we've looked at the finished image, we can come back into Lightroom and we'll have a look at Nik Efex Pro and Silver Efex Pro predominantly for our next way of doing this conversion. When I decided to convert this photograph, I knew it was going to be a fairly straightforward conversion. It already had a wide range of tones, a reasonable histogram, and plenty to work with. But to finish the photograph, I need to play a little bit with the presence of various elements in the photograph. I brought out the texture and clarity in the rocks and boulders, darkened the sky a little with a graduated filter, and finally a vignette. I do like a vignette on most photographs. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to work on a different picture this time, and I'm going to do it exactly the same as I did the other one. So we've got our image selected at the bottom, which I'm going to pick up, and I'm going to do this slightly differently. And when I go into the next interface, it's not going to ask me whether or not I want to make a copy. So I don't have to make a copy because it's going to ask me that now. Because when I go into Photo, Edit In, and I'm going to pick Silver Efex Pro from the drop down panel. It comes up there because I've actually loaded Silver Efex Pro into Lightroom as a plugin. So we go to this panel and it says edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. If we try and use anything other than JPEG or TIFF, it won't accept the file, so that's got to be set on TIFF. Adobe RGB 1998, 16 bits per component if your camera has it, and then resolution's fine, compression's fine. So let's just click on edit. So now you're going to open up Silver Efex Pro. And you'll know that it's doing that because it comes up in the top corner here, it says preparing file for editing. So we're almost in. There we go. So the interface really isn't that far removed from what you would see inside of Lightroom itself. On the left hand side we've got the presets library, and we could pick one of these to actually start our edit from. And if you find the one that you like, it's often a good idea to use one of these. It does give you a starting point. But what I'm actually going to do though is go up to neutral, because I want to show you how I use the global adjustments over here, the color filters and some of the other options to change the way that we use our images. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm still concerned about the highlights and the shadows. Now if I go down and select on the histogram zone 10 and zone 0, it'll put some cross hatching on there and show me where the shadows and the highlights are. And then that enables me to go back up and do a highlight adjustment. So let's adjust this first of all. If we go too far up, we should start to see some clipping coming out at the top of the sky. So we'll just take it back so we've got no clipping up there. There we go. And we've got the same down there. With our shadows, we could increase it a little bit, but actually I'm just going to leave those shadows just about where they are, to be honest. Don't think we need to make a lot of difference to it. We can slide the midtones up and down if we want to get an overall different feel, whether we want it lighter or darker depending on what way we go with it. And we can do that on that panel there. So the next thing I would deal with on it, once I've done that, is adjust the overall exposure a tweak. So do I need to actually make it a little bit darker? Do I need to make it a little bit lighter? Just however you feel about it, and that's just globally affecting everything. But I'm going to leave it generally where it is. So the color filters down here are the same as dropping a filter in front of your lens. So you could pick a red filter, makes a difference, an orange, a yellow, a green, or a blue. So for this edit, I'm going to leave it exactly on neutral. Now we've also got down here, we've got sensitivity sliders in just underneath film types of the various different sensitivities that a film would traditionally have to these colors. And we're going to edit this exactly the same as we did with the when we did inside Lightroom. So we can adjust how sensitive it is to greens, look, for example. So we can make the greens a bit lighter. We can do the same with our yellows. And we'll make the yellows a bit lighter on this one, look. Zoom that one up to there. Maybe we bring the greens back a little bit. No, they're about the same where they are. So we've got the yellows, and we've got cyans, and we've got blues that we can change its sensitivity to. Sometimes the blue will tweak the sky, but not a lot there. So I'm going to leave it generally like I do there at the moment. Now, what I'm also going to have a look at is some of the U-point technologies that we've got. Now, U-point technology allows us to actually select certain parts of the image and use just those separately. So when we go down here, for example, to where we have so when we come down here to control points, look, we can add a control point here. We're going to add some control points in this area here, this area here, this area here, because we're going to adjust these trees. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to link all these trees together as one group, and then when I start editing them, I will be affecting those parts. Now what this does is it allows me to change the amount that it's selecting. So everything which is in bright white is being affected by these areas. So we're going to bring this in. Let me just turn off that histogram for you, because all you're seeing there is the effect of the highlights and the shadows. So we can take that down, we can take this one down, we can bring this one down a bit more. We can start moving these up out in the way a little bit, I think, just so it takes off the branches in the foreground. So now we can see that the things which are bright white are predominantly the trees in the area. If we turn off the overlay, we can then play with these. So we can darken these trees down to give them a little bit more prominence. We can possibly boost their structure a little bit just to let them stand out a little bit more. We could just to we could amplify the whites a little bit just to lighten those areas in between them. Again, bring the brightness up. And if we want to see what it looks like, we can switch those off and back on, off, on. And just see how it gives a little bit more prominence to it. And we want to do that because we're trying to edit to make people look at things in the image and pick out the parts that we want. So by doing that, we've drawn somebody's eye into those areas. Now I want to give a little bit more crispness and structure to this tree down in the beginning, down in the foreground. So I'm going to create another control point here, and we're going to switch that one on so we can, sorry, not that one, we're going to do that one. And then I'm going to maybe reduce this a little bit down. Do I want to duplicate it? We can duplicate a control point as well and move it to somewhere else. We can change its size if we need to. Duplicate it again. You can duplicate them as many times as you want and move them about to the parts of the image that you really want to affect. And by doing this way, you don't have to create complex sections and layers. It's using the tonal ranges to make your selections, which, like I said, is probably more intuitive to black and white photographers. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select all of those control points together, put those into a group. We can switch that back off, and now just as we did with the other trees, we can actually change this control point here as well. So let's have a look at bring the brightness down a little bit so it's a little bit darker. Oh, we might leave that as it is actually, but what we might do is go in very strong on the structure. Yeah, so we'll give it a lot of dominance to the structure there. Look, so we've got a lot of texture in it. Fine structure, maybe the same on that as well. Amplify blacks. I think we'll take some out. Amplify the whites. I think we might give it a little bit more light down there in the foreground. And that gives us an overall feel to that image that we sort of want. Okay, so that's the end of my really sort of like basic adjustments that we would make. The next sort of things I would do would be going into creating some vignettes and things like that as well. And to be honest, I find that it's a bit easier and better to do those inside of Photoshop and Lightroom itself. So I'm going to get back out of Silver Efex Pro, and then I'm going to show you the finished photograph and see what you think of that. Sometimes your intent will change when you come to editing. But even then, if you don't have an endpoint, how do you know when you're finished? The danger with monochrome conversion is that you're trying too hard, editing too much, losing too much of the original intent of the photograph buried under layers of edits. Okay, so I hope that you found that useful and it wasn't too difficult for you to follow. You can always go back and pause and start it, restop it, or ask me questions in the comments below if you want to. I certainly enjoyed editing those two pictures, and it was quite interesting to go back to images from 2014 and take a second look at them. And I really encourage you guys to do exactly the same thing yourselves. Have a look, see what's lurking in the files that maybe at the time you didn't edit, didn't know how to edit, and now with a little bit more information, look and a few more skills, you're able to look at it differently and see what you can tackle. Maybe even give mono a try. You know, pick up some new skills and some new ideas, and hey, you know, put the comments below and let us all know what you're doing. So until next time, I hope you enjoy editing your older photographs, and maybe you can put some comments below like I suggested and let us know how you're getting on. It really is a good thing to do. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider giving it a thumbs up, and all your comments are appreciated. All new subscribers are warmly welcomed into the mix. And of course, all of this really helps my channel, so I do appreciate it. Until next time, bye for now, and I've got some more editing to do.